An argument for a god's existence that I don't think I've addressed before is the argument from degrees of perfection. I think Aquinas originally came up with this one, but here's an explanation that I found on Peter Kraft's website. We notice around us things that vary in certain ways. A shade of color, for example, can be lighter or darker than another. A freshly baked apple pie is hotter than one taken out of the oven hours before. The life of a person who gives and receives love is better than the life of one who does not. So we arrange some things in terms of more or less. And when we do, we naturally think of them on a scale approaching most and least. For example, we think of the lighter as approaching the brightness of pure white, and the darker as approaching the opacity of pitch black. I don't buy this. I don't think this is what we actually do. For example, if I say someone lives in a big house, I'm not thinking of its size as approaching some extreme of bigness. If I say they live in a small house, I'm not thinking of it as approaching an extreme of smallness. Rather, what I'm thinking is that it deviates from a mean rather than approaching most or least. If I say that a house is big, what I mean is that it is larger than the size I'm used to seeing. I am not thinking of its size as approaching the biggest house I've ever seen. Now, when we think of the goodness of things, part of what we mean relates to what they are simply as beings. We believe, for example, that a relatively stable and permanent way of being is better than one that is fleeting and precarious. Why? Because we apprehend at a deep, but not always conscious level, that being is the source and condition of all value. Finally and ultimately, being is better than non-being. I don't think that being per se is better than non-being. There are many modes of being that could quite sensibly be considered far worse than non-being. But if these degrees of perfection pertain to being, and being is caused in finite creatures, then there must exist a best, a source and real standard of all the perfections that we recognize belong to us as beings. No, that's a non sequitur. Judgments of value, like judgments of size, do not depend on the existence of some ultimate extreme. I judge the goodness or badness of something by comparing it to a mean rather than an extreme, just as I judge something to be big, small, cheap, expensive, light, or dark. When I say that something is good or bad, better or worse, I am not making that judgment by comparing something to perfection. I make such judgments by comparing things to the mediocre rather than the perfect. Also, this argument seems to be saying that existence comes in degrees, as though some things exist more than others, and that finite creatures must have their existence bestowed upon them by an infinite creature, in other words, a god. I think this is a baseless assumption. Something which only exists for a short period of time can create something that exists for a longer period of time. So I see no reason why finite creatures are dependent upon an infinite one.